So today we're going to talk about the Chrome DevTools. My goal is to just kind of give a primer on how it works, why it's useful, and how you can incorporate it in your daily coding life. First, I just want to kind of get a feel for where you guys are at with the DevTools. So if anyone's willing to share how, no worries, David. How do I phrase this question? So how many of you guys use the DevTools like consistently? Cool. So what do you mainly use it for, if anyone wants to volunteer?
Debugging.
Okay, and when you debug, what's your MO? You talking about the debugger, like putting breakpoints, or like what does your debugging look like usually?
It depends. If it's something pretty easy, I'll just usually do console logs, or I'll open up the network tab and look at what's going on there. And if I've got a layout issue, then I'll do the elements, and I'll go in and try to figure out like what CSS is applying at what level and muck around with there.
Cool. Right on. Sweet. So does anybody have, I want to make sure this is as helpful as possible. So I'd like to field a couple of just preliminary questions so that I make sure to touch on the things that you guys think is important. So does anybody have any just like questions generally about the DevTools, why we use them, anything before I kind of get started?
I guess I'm personally most interested in just kind of seeing how to use it better for debugging. My kind of MO right now is just console log everything. And I use it pretty regularly for CSS and kind of making sure I'm getting things sized correctly and testing out CSS before I put it into my file. But in terms of using breakpoints and stuff, I don't seem to have the best grasp of it yet.
Cool. Awesome. Anybody else? Cool. Well, yeah, the breakpoints are definitely, I was always intimidated by those at first. So that's, we're going to get into that. So first of all, I'm going to share my screen and we're going to take kind of a little grand tour. All right. I made up a little demo that we'll look at in a second. Okay. I made just a little hastily made demo app for our purposes. And so we're going to kind of look at all these tabs, not all of them, but some of them. So the very, very, very most common thing, or well, let's start from the top. The most common tabs that I use every day are the Elements tab, Console, Sources, and the Network tab. The Performance tab is awesome and amazing. I don't use it probably as often as I should, but it's really cool. We're gonna do a look at that a little bit today too, as well as Application. I honestly haven't ever used the Memory tab, and I honestly haven't really used the Security tab much. I don't even know what this is. Oh, that's for progressive web app stuff. Okay, cool. And then if any of you guys use React or Angular or anything, you probably have like the React DevTools and stuff like that. I have it as well, but this is not a React app, so you're not gonna it's not gonna show up. Okay, cool. So let's start at the top, Elements tab. Okay, so who can tell me what's the purpose of the Elements tab? What am I seeing here?
The DOM.
Yeah, you're basically seeing a visual representation of the DOM. So this is basically the data structure that our JavaScript code can interact with. And we can see it visually in here. So if you heard last week, we talked about how the browser is able to retrieve an HTML file from the internet and parse it and put it here. So right now we can just see my HTML or the DOM representation based on our my HTML file, which I've got right here. It's just a crappy little website, little HTML, cool. All right, so now anytime that you are, so what I use this for the most is for two things. These two icons up here are awesome. If you click on this guy, it allows you to actually select elements, actual HTML DOM elements or nodes from the page itself. And you can do it on any page you want. You know, if you're on Cloudinary, any website, you can inspect and look at the elements. So this is really useful for when you're trying to pinpoint a particular element on the page. You can dive right down into it. You can see it in the context of the entire tree. Super awesome. Once an element is selected, of course, you can see in this area, you can see all the styles that are being applied. We'll look at this a little bit more, but you can see all the styles that are being applied, as well as you can see the CSS Box Model Representation here, which is pretty awesome. This shows you the margin, border, and padding, as well as the text content of that particular element. You can see the sizings of all of it. So in this case, it looks like there's a 22 pixel bottom margin on this particular p tag, and you can even see it. That's what that gray area is. So for those who if you haven't really looked at the CSS box model before, these colors here correspond to what you see here on the left. So if there's padding, you'll see some green. If there's a border, you'll see a little bit lighter yellow. Margin, of course, is that orange color. And then the blue area, of course, is the content. And depending on what element you're selecting, you'll see various ones. So like it looks like this guy has some padding. Cool. Anything with a border on it, you can't. I mean, obviously you can see the border, but the border is in that little yellow. You can barely see it. Just that yellow color there. Cool. So that's an easy way of seeing what your element is, what kind of stylings are being applied, which is pretty sweet. And then over here, my favorite thing to do is when I'm trying to code something and I'm not sure of what styles to apply yet, but I want to test it out, you can actually type styles here directly. So if I were, if this were my site, I could render my p tag and be like, you know what does it look like with a font weight of 900? Oh, that doesn't make it. Oh, oops, I spelled it wrong. Let's try a font weight of 900. Hey, look at that. It's all bold now. Let's make it, does it look okay when it's italic? Maybe it does, maybe you don't. I don't know. It's whatever you want. But you can basically test all your styles here, which is really awesome because it is not permanent. You don't have to commit to anything. Once you refresh, boom, it's back to normal. Does anybody have any questions so far? Cool. All right. So the other thing that you can do besides selecting actual elements is, I think one of the coolest features of the DevTools is this responsive tab here. What it lets you do is mimic different device sizes. So phones, you can even just dynamically change. If you select responsive from this drop down here, you can select a bunch of phones, but then you can select responsive, and this just lets you customize whatever size you want. And this is so helpful for when you're trying to make responsive designs, because you can easily skip around to different devices and see, like, does this look okay? And then you can make your media queries. You can base your media queries off this. I use this all the time when I'm building sites for like my friends. And you can even you can like flip it around. So that's the horizontal. You can even sort of mimic crappier phones for like page load speeds and things like that. It's pretty cool. You can zoom in and out. There's a lot of cool stuff you can do. Highly recommend using this if you haven't tried it before.
I believe there is a way to also change it to, instead of the desktop view that is now, to change it to the mobile view, but I'm not sure. I'm trying to do it now.
Oh, you're trying to figure out how to put it into this mode?
No, right now this is desktop view, but you just put it smaller, like an iPhone. But I believe there is a way also to make the Stack Overflow how is in mobile view, the website itself.
Putting it into mobile view? I've never actually done that. I've always just used this. Are you saying like where it like pops out?
No, like right now it's a stackoverflow.com, which is the desktop view. You're just making it smaller, like how it's gonna look in mobile. But then Stack Overflow has also like a mobile.
Oh yeah. I see what you're saying. Yeah, they have like an actual mobile site. But as you can see, even just their normal site is very responsive, and it's very nice looking. And here's a site that I'm working on for my friend, and I have it fully responsive. So like, it's like different. I use this thing to make sure that at various sizes it kind of it looks okay.
Yes.
So this is a super useful little thing here.
One of the things I like to do with that, I've used it a few times for like readmes for GitHub repositories, is you can click the 3 dots in the top right corner of the responsive view window and put like a phone frame around it if you do the show device frame, which is kind of nice for like screenshots and things like that.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah, that's pretty sweet.
Although it doesn't seem to like the S5 or something.
Yeah. Let's try it. I don't know if it's different over here. There we go. Yeah, it's pretty cool. Yep. I forget about that. But that's
Mine is
awesome.
disabled. How do you make it? Mine is disabled for some reason. I see it, but I cannot click it. Show device frame.
Oh, I don't know. Maybe
You have to make sure you have an actual phone selected from the dropdown and not just in the responsive mode.
Got it. Thank you. Yeah, that was
Oh,
the
that's what I was doing wrong over here. I was in responsive. Yeah,
Got it. Thanks.
there it is.
Pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally forgot about that. Thank you for pointing that out. Yeah, it's pretty cool. I like that. I like that feature. Cool. All right. So that's the Elements tab in a nutshell. It lets you just kind of get a bird's eye view of the DOM and the stylings that are being applied to every element. And it lets you really dive down into individual branches and nodes on your tree. Super useful. Okay, so let's go to the console. All right, so someone mentioned that they use this mostly for console logs and for viewing viewing as they're debugging, you know, maybe variables and things to make sure that whatever logic they're performing is doing the right thing, which is certainly useful. And there's definitely a place for that. So let's, for example, this little app, my goal is to make it so that when you type into the form or the input, it will capitalize, it'll transform the text, meaning it's supposed to take the text that you typed, and if it's a capital letter, uncapitalize it, and if it's a lowercase letter, then capitalize it. So it just does an opposite capitalization effect. It's totally arbitrary and totally silly, but I think it's a fun little example for our purposes. So for example, let's look at this code really quick. I kind of threw this up at the last minute, but basically the idea is I'm able to grab my input, which is this guy. I grab my output, which is this guy. It's just a paragraph tag. And when I type, it's going to call this function, which will then take the text that I've typed and it will transform it and display it to the screen. But suppose I'm coding this and I am not really sure what I'm doing yet. I might do something like this. Console log E. Let's look at this event and see what happens. So if we go over here, I'm gonna click on my console and I'll put this back to normal view. Okay, so I'm gonna start typing. Okay, notice on the right, I'm able to see the event that is getting triggered by my event listener that I registered on my input element. Sweet, I can now see this whole thing. I can look at, so in here, I can look at all the information that was packed with this event. So I can look at the target element, the thing that the event happened on, which of course is that input. And what's cool about the console is that anytime there's a reference to a DOM element in here, you'll actually see it highlighted to the left. And if you click on it, it takes you to the actual elements tab, which is also pretty cool. Sometimes annoying if you don't actually want to go there, but it's pretty cool. So we can now look at this whole element here. It's got all these properties that we're not really interested in. The only thing that we really care about is the value property, the thing that I've, of course, typed into the input, which of course is this string right here. Okay, so
what means the hashtag?
Say that again.
What it means the hashtag in the input? Sorry, I should have.
Yeah. So so this hashtag just means that it has an ID. So All
Oh,
I
I see.
did, yeah, all I did is give this input an ID of input for,
Well, I was wondering why is twice? Okay, so the first one is the
yeah.
input tag, and the second is just that the ID is also called input.
Yeah, I happen to just call it the same thing. So,
Gotcha.
yep,
Thanks.
yep. And if it had a class, you'd probably see a class there. But actually, I'm not sure. I don't remember. But yeah, that's a great question. Okay, cool. So it looks like I'm able to, I'm going to change this to e.target.value because that is the reference to the actual text that I'm entering into the field. So now we're going to take a look at that.
So something that that someone pointed out to me that blew me away was that
Mhm.
you get the whole object or a JavaScript object. If you right mouse click on the value, you can copy the path down the object tree to that value. So you would have already copied target.value when you did a console log of E.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty cool, right? So if we go back to that. So so could you repeat that?
So yeah, if you expand that object and travel down to where you saw value on your target,
Mm-hmm.
and then if you right mouse click on top of value, it gives you an option to copy the path.
I see what you're saying. Yep.
So then you could just go back into your code and then you could paste that at the end of E.
And there you go. Yeah, that's pretty awesome.
Good to know.
Yeah, that's a really useful, another really useful, I guess, feature. I actually didn't know about that, so thank you for pointing that out. There's a lot of cool stuff. Learn new stuff every day. But okay, cool. So now that we've got that, now that we're able to kind of see the console logs and stuff, suppose. So I'm gonna change this back to where we were, and just some other little things about the console generally is you don't have to necessarily use the console just to view output text from your code. So I could just as well interact with the DOM tree directly right now as it stands, which can also be useful for just doing some, when you're debugging, but you're not really even sure, like maybe you're not ready to put in breakpoints yet, you just need to ask the DOM some questions. We could very much, we can actually talk to the DOM directly. So let's get the input element. And this can be really useful because like if you're in the middle of, it's not always easy to just like grab a particular element from a page, especially if you're in React or Angular where there's kind of a few layers of abstraction over the DOM. It's not really always the simplest thing to just go ahead and grab an element within your code without doing some, extra boilerplate. This can be useful for just doing some initial diagnostics. So let's go ahead and grab the input. And what's cool is that now I have access to it right here. And I can now do stuff like, okay, well, what's the, what's the value? Oh, look, it's an empty string. If I type, oh, we'll talk about that in a second. I'm gonna, hey, look at that. It shows exactly what's there. And I can also look at my output, which, oh, my code is already doing that. So this is actually redundant up here. I can ask questions about the output. I can be like, okay, well, what's your inner text? Oh, it's empty, right? There's nothing there.
I know that you can also, instead of use document.element by ID, you can use just a $sign.
That's if you're using jQuery.
No, I mean, like if you point to the input and review the element, like you right click in the beginning, then there is a $sign that is pointing there, and then you in the console, you can reveal the element. Like, no, like if you go back
maybe
to,
I don't understand what you're saying.
Yeah, if you go to the input, like in the beginning, and you right click to, like you were explaining how to select the input. If you would go to the left, yes, and right click.
Oh, I see, okay.
And in right click, what is called the inspect element or something like that. I mean, all the way to the left. If you right click the left, yeah, that one.
Oh, over here, I see what you're saying.
Yeah, and you inspect, assuming this is a real website. And then we have the input here, and it say here that the input is equal to $sign.
Yeah.
0. So instead of say document.element by ID, then this variable $sign, and that is in the console log. It's actually a message there. I just saw it. It say in the console log.
Oh, that's cool. Man, I did not know that either. I'm glad you're here. That is cool. Sweet. Well,
what I didn't know is that it say in the message. I never saw that message before because I do it's very quick.
Yeah, I've always like seen that, but I never even like thought to look at what that was. But sweet. Okay, that is really awesome. And I bet there's one, which is the next one. And they're probably, I'm assuming that's just listed in the order in which the DOM tree is I guess parsed. So cool. That is also helpful. I just happen to have them already labeled as in my code as that value, but that is awesome. Cool. All right. So that is that's another nice thing about the console tab is that you're able to actually interact with the DOM as it is in its compiled form, which is really awesome. I use that a lot when I'm like, I mean, it totally depends on the problem that you're trying to solve, but I've found doing that to be pretty useful in certain cases. Okay, so as you notice, I've got this error here. So we're gonna take a look at that using the debugger. I kind of did this on purpose. So notice I'm typing and it is yelling at me that this function is not a function. ToUpperCase.join is not a function. So we're going to use the debugger to kind of get an idea of maybe what's causing that. So the debugger is located in the sources tab, and this I probably use the most. There are ways of integrating it into VS Code, which I'm not going to get into today, but I will next week for the VS Code episode. But in the sources tab, basically we're able to...
Next week is at the same time?
Yep.
Okay, thanks.
Yep, no problem. So we are able to, in the sources tab, we're able to actually set breakpoints in the code as it's running. So we're able to kind of watch the program run, but at our speed. Is there anyone here that like has never used a debugger at all? So they can definitely be a little intimidating at first, but it's really not too bad. Basically, here's my file. You'll see in sources tab to the left, these are all the files that are being served up to our browser. And if you go to any site let's go to like this one, for example, and you go to sources, you're going to see all of the things related to this site. For security reasons, a lot of things are like hidden away or minified. Like, for example, I bet some of these are like, I bet this is minified. Yeah, like see how, I mean, that's unreadable. It's just, it's all smushed together. But when you're developing, you're not going to have that problem. You're not going to minify your code. You're not, you're not building a production build. You're just, you're using your source code. And so the debugger is really useful for skipping through your code as you wrote it, line by line, step by step. So let's go ahead and put a breakpoint on line 1. Okay, and you can put breakpoints. You can pretty much put a breakpoint anywhere, but it has to be on either an expression or a statement. So like I can't really, like putting a breakpoint here, it's kind of weird because it's not really, that's kind of like, it's the closing brace of a function block. So that it doesn't really make sense to put a block there or to put a breakpoint there. But we can put one there. And of course we can put them at any one of these intermediate spaces too. That's what all these little guys mean here. But before we get into that, we're gonna first, let's just do the one breakpoint first. And you'll notice that nothing really happened when I put that there. That's because this has already run. So I'm gonna go ahead and refresh and we should now see, boom, now it's paused. It's stopped at this spot. And now we can actually look on the line that we're on, what's going on. So one thing to just remember with the debugger, and this is true for whether you're using it in Node or any environment really, whatever your breakpoint is on, it hasn't read that line yet. So if I hover over input, notice there's nothing there. That's because this line hasn't executed yet. The breakpoint is right before it. So, but I can look at things that have already been defined. For example, the document. So if I hover over the document, I can see all the properties of the document. And I can see that this function is a property on the document. I can hover over the input string. Actually, I guess it doesn't do anything for the input string. But it's only when I either step over or resume the execution that you're going to see this actually being defined. So one thing to remember is resuming the script execution is just going to continue running the script until it hits another breakpoint. Whereas this step over basically only goes to the next function call. So this is really nice for when you don't really want to put a breakpoint on like literally every single step through your code. You can kind of just go at a leisurely pace. So we'll try that right now. So if I step over, oh, boom, it goes to the next line. And now if I hover over input, hey, look at that. There's my input. Okay, cool. Well, we're going to step over again. Okay, so now my transform test function is being defined. And if I hover over that, boom, it's now a function. Same with the next one. Same with the next one. And it has now been, there's some other stuff that it's going to be doing. And you'll notice that I'm now in kind of a crazy place where now I'm stepping through some code that's just kind of, we don't really want to be here. This is just stuff kind of happening under the hood. So this can be useful, but only so far as you're going through your code and not through like third-party code and stuff. Like sometimes you'll find yourself like on line 2000 of the Redux library or something, which usually is not helpful. So we'll just go ahead and resume the script execution. We're done. The page loads. Everything's good. Cool. All right. Well, you'll notice though, if I start typing, it's not breaking. That's because I need to put my breakpoint on the actual place where I expect my function to run. So notice this function here, handle input event. I'm going to put a breakpoint right there. And what I'm going to do, what I'm going to show you, is what's called a watch variable. This is really useful for when you care about a particular value in your code. So over here, we haven't looked at this menu over here too much yet, but we're gonna take a look really quick. So a watch is just an expression or a variable that you can type where it will basically tell you what that value is so that you don't have to try to dig around for it. So I'm gonna go ahead and look up the property or the variable E. Not in code, just literally E. Come on. Okay, it's not available yet, but I'm gonna start typing. Hey, look at that. Now it recognizes it. It recognizes that there's a variable called E, which is short for event, and it is an input event, obviously. And again, this is another way of looking at that. This is another way of looking at that console log. This is a little, the reason why I prefer doing this to console logging is because with a console log, you don't really get to see the context of the console log. You see it after the whole program is run. So that console may have been called 10 times or 100 times, and all you do is see a whole bunch of errors, like see how there's 6 errors here. Whereas if I'm doing it in my source, I actually see it in the context of the actual runtime of the code. So this is why breakpoints are so awesome. You get to see the value in the context of the program being run. And you can put watch variables here for various expressions of actual input. And what's cool is that you can even do stuff that's not necessarily a variable in your code, but you can just you can just evaluate expressions. So let's say I want to know if e.target.value is equal to I don't know, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And check it out. No, it's not. It is false. It's able to actually evaluate this expression, even though this isn't an expression in my actual code. I'm actually getting to ask the browser questions of the code as it's running, which I think is pretty awesome. And this is super, super helpful. The next thing to look at here is the call stack.
I have a quick question.
Yeah, go ahead.
The reason that we put the E in the watch, but the E was defined before, there is a reason because it's in the scope. So we have it, I believe it's the same E that is in the scope local, or no?
Yep. That is a great observation. So we're going to look at that in just a second.
Okay.
But yes, you're absolutely right. This variable here, this E, is the exact same one here.
So
And,
that's my question. What is the watch for if with the variables are already declared?
Yeah, so the watch lets you do stuff like write expressions that aren't in your code. Like you're not going to see this expression e.target.value equals ABCDFG in your scope because this is only stuff that exists in your code. This lets you like actually kind of customize what you're looking for. You can like see if there are
makes sense.
Yeah.
But for that I need to declare E or no? in the works?
No. You didn't need to. I was just doing that as an example
No, that's fine. Okay,
because it's a
makes sense.
because it's just like a very accessible value. So yeah, that's why I did that first. It's just to show you like, hey, you can do this, and then hey, you can also do this, but there's no relation between the two. Obviously, if you put in an expression or a value that doesn't exist, like if I tried to put in a variable called like not there, it'll just be either not available or undefined, you know, depending on the situation.
Got it.
Cool. All right, so we're now going to step through our code to see where our error is coming from. So it already kind of gives us a hint. Alrighty. So let's put our breakpoint here, and then we're gonna put a breakpoint here. Already got one there, and there, and there, and there, and there. A little overkill, but doing it anyways. All right. Okay, and you'll notice that the breakpoints are all listed down here. So if you wanted to like remove one or remove all of them in one fell swoop, you can do that all here. That's what the breakpoint section is. Oh, and sorry, I actually totally totally went on a tangent. I meant to clarify what the call stack is first. The call stack just shows you the list of all the functions that have been called up till now. That's actually not entirely accurate. It's the call stack. So it's all the functions that are currently being run, but they haven't resolved yet. They haven't popped off the stack. And if you aren't sure what the call stack is, just generally, I would recommend just Googling what's the call stack. It's very informative. It just has to do with the way that functions work. But you can actually see the stack here. If I had multiple functions here, which we will see that in a second, then we would just see them all stack up here. Cool. All right, so the next thing to look at is the scope. So again, scope has to do with what kinds of variables are available within certain blocks of code. So your local scope has to do with the things that are immediately in your breakpoint. And then you've got your global scope, which of course is the window object, and it has all that crap. I mean, it's gigantic. So let's not look at that. But what's cool is that in the local scope, I can check out what this event is. I can look at the target again. I even have access to the this value if there is one. I'm using an ES6 function, so obviously there is no this. The script, I don't really use that too much, but the local scope and the global scope are very awesome to use, very helpful. And you know, it's kind of between the scope and the watch, you're able to really get an understanding of what's going on in your code as it's at that point during its runtime. Cool. So does that make sense? Does anybody have any questions about this scope area?
Sounds good.
Cool. All right, so let's go back to our code. So where are we right now? We are at line 9, and we're about to step into this display output function, which, well, actually, it's going to be the transform text function, but we're going to put breakpoints in all of these so that we can really see what's going on. All right, so like I said, the blue button takes you to the next breakpoint. This steps into the next function call. In our case, I put so many breakpoints that there's not going to be too much of a difference between what happens here. But let's just resume and see what happens. So I expect, because this transform text function is getting called, I expect to start seeing what I'm getting. So notice my value is empty right now. Okay, we're going to step through. Hey, check it out. All right, so here's my empty string, which just got passed in. Okay, and now we have this series of transformations where I'm splitting it. Okay. Okay, and then we've got my map function. So the idea is I split the text into an array, letter by letter, and then using the map function, I'm either capitalizing or lowercasing the letter based on what it is currently. So a little tricky way of doing that, a tricky way of seeing whether something is uppercase is to just compare itself to the uppercase function call on itself. So if they're both the same, then we know that it's already uppercased. So then we're going to go ahead and lowercase it. And if they're not the same, then we know it's lowercase. So we're going to go ahead and uppercase it. Just a little cheeky way of doing that. Now, all of a sudden, we can maybe see what's going on. So we know there's an error in here somewhere.
But in this one, if it's uppercase and lowercase, it will lowercase everything.
Say what?
If it's a mix of uppercase and lowercase, it will lowercase everything, right?
No, we're doing it. This is the letter. It's doing it by letter because we're mapping through the string.
Oh, gotcha. So letter by letter.
Yeah.
Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. So as we can see here, we've got this little error saying that to uppercase.join is not a function. Has anyone figured out the problem yet?
Yeah, you're trying to do a join on your uppercase method where you should be doing it on the map.
Right, exactly. Exactly. So we're going to take this guy and put it on our map. And maybe this will work. Let's find out. Okay, I'm going to start typing. Beautiful, it starts. Let's go through. All right, so here's our T. We're going to then look at our map. Okay, let's look at our S. Okay, sweet, there it is. There's our T letter. Okay, so we know that it's already lowercase, so it's gonna go ahead and uppercase it. And then it's gonna join it. Hey, no error this time. Okay, now it goes to our display output. So here's our data, which is now in capital T, so we can verify that it's working right. And now it's going to assign the inner text to whatever that letter is. And boom, there it is, right there. And just so we can see this in action, I'm gonna go ahead and deactivate all these breakpoints just so we can, we don't have to step through all that every time we type. And there it is.
Would you mind just showing how you set the breakpoints on each of those steps in your arrow function?
Absolutely.
Yeah, real quick.
For sure. Yeah, let me, I'll remove them all so you can see it from the beginning. So once you've actually put a breakpoint on a function, then you'll see these guys just pop up. And if you click on one, that becomes that becomes its own little breakpoint.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, so you don't have to worry about like turning all of this into like you don't have to like go through here and be like, oh crap, but now I have to like make this into a code block and like put them on a different line. You don't have to worry about that. Like it's smart enough to know what it can and cannot execute a breakpoint on, if that makes sense.
Yeah, to do it here is more efficient because I used to do it in the VS Code just before the number.
Yeah.
but I don't have this benefit.
Yeah. Yeah, that's one of the downsides of the VS Code debugger. Sometimes
So those breakpoints there in the line, that's similar then to like stepping into something, but you're just setting them in specific places so you can kind of jump right to them.
Exactly. Yeah. This just gives me a little bit more fine-tuned control. Although, so for example, let's say that I'm going to start my breakpoint on line 9, which is just the input event handler. Let's see the difference between that and stepping over versus what I had before. So I'm going to start typing. We'll see that again. Okay. If I step over the next function call, where do you expect this to go to?
To your transform text.
So you need to step into, right?
Yeah. Oh, whoops. That's what I meant to click. Wrong one. Yep. Let me try that again. Okay. Now we type. And now we're going to go step into next function call. Hey, look, there it is. And that's cool, but I don't really have the benefit of, so I can see where I'm at. Like there's the parameter or the argument that's being passed in. But I don't really have the benefit of, until I step in again, which I'll get to my split, or sorry, my uppercase. So there's my map. And if I step into again, I'll get to see, there's my join. And there's my uppercase again. So, because it's a map, so I'm doing it twice because there's 2 letters that time. Cool. Goes to join. Step out of that. Okay, now I'm back to, now I've transformed text is done, so that's off the stack. And in fact, let's look at the call stack as this happens. So now I'm in the display output, and now it's starting to go into the crazy stuff. So I'm going to do that one more time. Pay attention to the call stack.
How do you reset this? Are you using a shortcut or is something I don't see?
Resetting the breakpoints?
No, updating everything from beginning so you can go one by one. Like
I'm not sure.
Let's do it. Like, can you do it again? Like,
Sure.
I'm gonna stop.
Yeah.
Yes, what you just did is.
Oh yeah. So I clicked on step into.
I guess I'm asking like how you do the source code when you put the breakpoint. Like, do you reset the browser? Do you refresh the browser or where?
Yeah. I'm not sure I understand what you mean. Like I can either add them or I can take them out by just clicking on them.
So I guess when you put the breakpoint and you go step by step, let's say 2 steps.
Yeah.
If you go, like if you play now, what did you do? What did you just do?
So all I did was type the letter.
Oh, because it's listening.
Yeah, that's just because the only time that this function actually gets called is when you type something. So my breakpoint's only going to get triggered when something actually runs, and this just happens to be the thing that causes it to run.
Okay, got it. So it's the refresh part, but the add event listener is doing that when
yeah. So
typing.
So that's and I'm glad you asked that question because that actually brings up a really important point, which is suppose I put a breakpoint here. Well, if I start typing, nothing's happening, right? Because this is already run. That already had its chance, and that happened on load. So if I refresh now, boom, now it's going to run. So when you're doing breakpoints and stuff, you have to be pretty aware of what at what point between when the browser first parses the HTML and runs the script, you have to be pretty clear on when you expect a particular line of code to run, because notice on this case it runs when I refresh because this script just runs. There's nothing triggering that apart from the fact that that's just a script that the browser is instructed to run. That's what the script tag, that's what a script tag is. It's just, it says, okay, run that script. It's parsing, it goes top to bottom, sees the script, okay, parse it and run it, cool. But notice if I were to put a breakpoint on line 9 and I refresh, unlike the first case, notice it doesn't, nothing happens. There's no breaking, no breakpoint gets triggered. That's because the only way for this particular line of code to run is for me to type. And so yeah, you just always want to be aware of what is the condition under which you expect a particular line of code to run when you're debugging, because it can be very, you can sometimes, this has happened to me before where I get, it's not running the way I expect, like the breakpoint's not hitting, and I'm just like, is the debugger broken? Like, what's going on? I don't understand. When really it's just like, oh crap, this only runs if I do something very specific, like trigger an event or whatever.
I always get caught up on the functions because like if I put a breakpoint on line 8 instead of line 9, thinking that like, oh, that's where the function is.
Right.
But
Yes,
it's actually
that's
the
a
first
great
line
point.
of the function. It's the first line.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a great point. So for example, if I were to put a breakpoint there, when I refresh, it's going to break on line 8 because that's where this function gets defined, but that's where it gets defined. That's not where it gets run. It's only when I type that it actually runs. And so that's when I'm going to see that line there. So yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up because that's a very important thing to be aware of when you're debugging. I think that's kind of one of the first hangups that I had, is I was kind of I was wrapping my head around the debugger and how it works.
I literally just did that while I was messing around and went, oh yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, especially if you're using add event listener. Like I believe if you're not using any DOM, then it's very straightforward. It's from top to bottom.
Yeah.
But if you're using DOM manipulation, then you have to realize when are those event listeners being invoked.
Right. And the same goes for when you're doing other asynchronous things like making HTTP calls and stuff. Yeah, you just have to be aware of at what point in the runtime are you expecting to see this.
Can you explain again that function call when it's not random versus what it is? Basically what you just did.
Oh, explain why it only runs the first time, or why when I refresh it starts here, but then when I type it breaks at line 9.
Yes.
Sure. So this just has to do with how has to do with how functions work. So a function is, well, let me back up, and I'm going to have a whole not next week, but the week after, I'm going to have a whole episode on just functions, where I'll go into much more depth on this. But basically, there's two things happening here. If you zoom out and just look at the script, the main JS file, as the JavaScript engine is reading this from top to bottom, it's defining these variables one at a time. There's nothing fancy about a function. It's just another variable. So line 8 is where this function is getting defined. It's saying it's the difference between cooking a cake or baking a cake and and putting the recipe into your recipe book. Line 8, all we're doing is putting the recipe into the recipe book. We're not baking the cake, we're just putting it away in our book. So it has to be in our book though, in order for us to cook it, right? So line 8 is simply defining that function so that when it gets called later, which happens to be when I type in text into that input box, that's when I'm going to see this function actually perform its duty. Whereas the first time through, we're just defining what the function's called and putting in our memory banks, basically. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. It's kind of like storing it until it's ready to be called.
That's exactly it. Yeah. I could not have put it more concisely. It's storing it somewhere before it gets used. So line 8 is when it stores it. Line 9 is while it's getting used, while it's running. Yeah. Alrighty. So I've only got a few more minutes left. I really want to mention the network tab because this is really, really important. I use this constantly, like literally every day. I don't think there's been a day that I haven't used the network tab. So the very, very first thing that I do anytime there's an error is I check the network tab. Unless it's like an obvious one that the console says, like .join is not a function. Like if it's not an obvious problem, I go to the network tab. Because what the network tab does is it tells you all the information being passed to and from this particular site. So I'm going to go to my friend's site just to give you an example. So, because this one actually does make requests, unlike my crappy little demo there. So let's look at this demo tab. And I'm going to go ahead and refresh. Actually, I'm going to go to the actual site. I'm sure he won't mind me using his site for an example. So, all right, let's take a look at what's going on here. So I'm going to refresh and check that out. These are all of the HTTP requests that are being made from this site. So if we look at the first one, this is our initial request. This is like the request for the actual site itself. Right, we're saying, hey, I want to go to this site. It's a GET request, and it looks like there's a 200, meaning it's okay. If you're curious to know what all these different status codes mean, I'd recommend just Googling the status codes. There's lots of good information on that. But what you can do is you can actually get an idea of what you're, like anytime you see a request here, if it's in red, it means that there's some sort of error. Luckily, everything here is working fine. But what's interesting is we can even see what we're getting back. So this tab right here, so the headers shows this is our information about our request. The preview, sometimes there's nothing to preview, but usually this is helpful for pictures and stuff, right? We can see the previews of pictures and fonts. We can also look at the response. So if I go to some compositions, look at that. It's an HTML page, just like I expect. If we look at the JavaScript files that are coming back. Okay, that's what I expect. It's JavaScript. Same with all of these. And you can, of course, filter things. You can look at only XHR requests, so you can look at only JavaScript or only CSS. You can look at media requests and everything. You can, of course, if you want to, you can clear it if you decided that you want to start fresh. That's useful. But the network tab is where you can see what you are getting back from a request. And I can't tell you how many times that I realized that I wasn't getting data back from a server when I thought I was, and all I had to do was go to the network tab to check.
And we see very quick VS School website. I see
The VS Code website?
Yeah, I see a red, but I don't know if that means an error. Oh, no, I'm sorry, VS School, the website.
Oh, vSchool, I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's fine. I see this 3x. I don't know if that's from the console. That's not from the network.
Hey, look at that. There's an error right there. Is this what you wanted to look at?
Yeah, well, I was talking about the number 4 on top with the X all the way to the right, a little below Netflix Party plugin.
Sorry, where?
It's all the way on top, to the right.
To the top, to the right.
A little more on top. There is 4, like that. There is an X. A little more on top. Sorry, all the way to the right. There is a number 4 on the X. Yes.
I'm sorry. I see what you're saying. Yeah, so those are just console errors.
Okay.
So I'm not sure what those are, to be honest with you.
But the last one is for the network.
This one's a network error, yeah. So if we click on it, we'll be able to see, we can get some information on what's happening potentially. So this tells us that there is a, so there's not too much information here, honestly. It doesn't even tell us what the, yeah, there's not really a whole lot to go on here. I'm not really sure what could be causing that.
What's the response?
Who knows? There isn't one because it's an error. Yeah. So that's not the most helpful thing in the world. If we do ref, I think I've already got something running in another. I don't know. So, oh, here we go. Okay. So I've already got I'm building a little server for my friend for storing his music. And if we look at this, maybe there's some, this is just saying, oops. Oh, that's not gonna be helpful. Let's look, I bet you Stack Overflow's got some fun network errors going on. Because like, it's not always like necessarily a bad thing. It just means that, you know, sometimes requests don't go through. Ah, here's one. I don't know if there's gonna be too much here. Yeah. Usually, like, especially when you're building a server or whatever, like you're gonna have, you should see, basically if you see a red, that means that you've probably got, it's probably something to look at. It's a red flag. Especially if it's on a request that you are familiar with. Like, for example, if this were like an API I was building that wanted to, I don't know, get like images from somewhere, like Cloudinary or something, then you would see the full URL there, and then you would see the status of it. So like over here, see, 200 is good. If it was like a 500 or like a 403, that would be unauthorized. 500 usually means just some general server error. You would see it here, and this would be your first place to really look.
So if there's no status code, it's a resolution error?
I mean, it could be a million things. Like this, for example, is a JavaScript file that is just not coming back for who knows what reason. Because I mean, there's a million reasons why a particular request may fail. But the network tab can at least give you, like, the network tab is only going to show you it's going to show you, it's like going to a crime scene. You're just going to see the remnants of the crime scene. And then, but it's a good place to start, because then you can start investigating. You can start looking at, like, okay, well, what are the headers? What's the payload? So if I were making a form, if I were making a post request, I would see the things that I was sending. So
If there is no status code, that means that the developer, whoever built the app, didn't put the status code.
right, yeah, exactly.
And at the end of the day, all these status codes will depending of the developer that he did the right thing with the status code, because
yeah,
if the developer was just putting whatever, then we are like completely in the wrong
exactly path. Yeah, like a status code is not, just because it says 200 doesn't necessarily mean it's all good. And just because it's a 500 doesn't necessarily mean it's all bad. Because yeah, it's a good point. That's all on whoever coded that particular endpoint. So all the dev tools are for, or all the network tab is for, is just seeing the traffic, whatever it is. Because then all it does is give you enough information that you can start investigating further, which of course is the whole purpose of the dev tools to begin with. So yeah, does anybody have any questions?
Is it possible that we can get a recording of this lesson?
I believe it is being recorded right now. I'm working on a website where I'm going to have all of these just available, each episode. So you'll be able to come back and view them as like an archive. But this series is brand new, and I just haven't had a chance to build it yet. So, but yes, the short answer to the question is yes, they will be available. Hopefully within the next few weeks.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, no problem. So next week.
These are Fridays, Mondays and Fridays?
It's Mondays.
Mondays, okay.
Yep. Mondays at 4 o'clock. So next week is going to be on VS Code. So I'm going to go over things like using the version control that's built into VS Code. I'll briefly touch on containers if I get a chance. I'll talk about the debugger in Node as well, or sorry, the debugger in VS Code as well as just some general tips and stuff for VS Code because I use this every day. So
When you say containers, you mean Docker or you mean something else?
yeah, I'm referring to, so Docker is not the only like container platform, but that is kind of the most common, and that's what I've used it for. So yes, if I have time, I'm gonna kind of show how you can use the Remote Explorer to like tie into a Docker container.
Yes, thank you.
But it's not going to be, I'm not going to have time to like go into Docker necessarily. So that I'm hoping to make Docker a episode, although that might have to be several episodes because Docker is kind of a beast.
By itself, yeah.
And I'm also wanting to do, I mean, I have so many things that I want to do, but next week's VS Code. The week after, I'm really excited to do functions. We're going to talk about generators and I just lost my train of thought. Functional programming generally, classes. We'll talk about ES6, and we'll talk about closures and just some of the really cool things you can do with functions and some ways of kind of writing better functions because that is kind of hard sometimes functions are hard. So I'm hoping to uncover some or demystify some stuff with functions. And eventually I'm hoping to do a whole one on TypeScript. Like that will be I'll probably dedicate an entire series to TypeScript. I'll probably do like 4 or 5 different episodes just on TypeScript. But those are all in the works. And if any of you have any suggestions or requests, please let me know. You can find me on GitHub. I'm also in through that registration site. I believe my where you went to get the link to this, I believe my email is there as well. But it's just bbgrabbag@gmail.com. I'll paste it into the group chat really quick.
Do you mind to show me what is that extension? I'm looking for the extension that is called Remote Explorer. Is that I put a Remote Explorer in the marketplace and I got many apps with the same name.
So do this is the one that what's the one that I have? Oh, duh. Yeah, sorry, it's this one. Remote containers. And there's actually several ones that are contained in it. So if you just do get the remote development one, and then it'll basically install all these other ones.
Okay.
Yeah, this is the legit one. Anyways, what was I doing? Oh, let me put my email into the chat. Oh man, I hate the Zoom interface. There we go. Okay. And then I think, and then you can go to my website, which is what is my website called? I forget what my website's called. I never go to my own website. Is it btdev.com? No. Ah, crap, I don't remember. I'll find it out. Anyways, my email's there. If anybody has any questions, feel free to email me. I'm also on LinkedIn and the vSchool Slack. So for those of you who are already students at vSchool, but if you're not a student at vSchool or you're interested, please mention Code Talk when you register. So yeah, anybody have any questions before we head out?
Thank you. Was nice to know more about
Cool.
this.
Yeah, I hope that was helpful.
Yeah, that was.
Sweet. Well, have a good day, guys. I'll see you next week.
You too.
All right. Thanks, Ben. See ya.
Yeah, I'll see you.